Hello, everyone. I am Stacy Halbach, and today I wanted to give a presentation about fertile soil families. I know it's a very odd title, but I'm sure you'll get near the end of this presentation why we named it this way. So, to start us off, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. Those of you who are watching most likely know who I am, but just in case you don't, I'm Stacy Halbach. This is my family here. I am a mother of six kids. So, my oldest is now a senior in high school, and he will be joining the Air Force this summer. And then I've got some high schoolers, I've got a middle schooler, I've got an elementary school, and then I've got two 7-year-old twins. So, I kind of have a kid in every age range, which really helps in presentations like these because I feel like I have some personal experience with all the different ages. I've been in Catholic ministry for a long time. My husband and I met in ministry. He's a deacon in the Catholic Church now, and I went to um, a small Catholic school in Wichita to get my theology degree. So I've really been in ministry for over 20 years. And so I've always wondered what about families keeps their kids Catholic? I would see a large Catholic family and they would all be very devout. And even after the kids left for college, they kept with their faiths. And then I would see a very similar family, same size, same devotion while they were kids. And then they would leave the Catholic Church or they would, migrate away. And so I'm like, what is it? Like, what's the special formula, the special recipe to keep kids Catholic, to keep kids and families faithful, weathering all the different storms? So my prayer was, Lord, how do I help lead my family to happiness and holiness that will last even after they graduate? And so for the last 2 years or so, I've really had a lot of research, a lot of prayer time, a lot of diving into scripture, trying to gather wisdom wherever I can find it. So one of the sources of wisdom is, of course, scripture. So let's go to the Gospels. In Matthew's Gospel, we all know probably the very common parable, the parable of the sower. Okay, so this is in Matthew 13, 1 through 9. I think it's important for us to pause right now and prayerfully listen to these scripture because the scripture is God's word, the parable of the sower in Matthew's gospel. It's chapter 13, verses 1 through 9. If you're in a small group setting, you can pause right here and someone can proclaim the word in your own group. On that day, Jesus went out of the house and sat down by the sea. Such a large crowd gathered around him that he got into the boat and sat down, and the whole crowd stood along the shore, and he spoke to them at length in parables, saying, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and birds came and ate it up. Some fell on the rocky ground, where it had little soil. It sprang up once, but because the soil was not deep, and when the sun rose, it was scorched, and it withered for lack of roots. Some seed fell on thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it. But some seed fell on rich soil and produced fruit, 100 or 60 or 30-fold. Whoever has ears ought to hear. Now, later on in Matthew, he goes and explains this, but I like this image here that you can see because it kind of shows us the different faith types. So the gospel, the seeds have not changed. The truth of our faith doesn't change. It's where are they going? What type of soil is embracing that truth? Okay. So that got me to think, I want my family to be a fertile soil family. So it's not, again, how parents are making the faith attractive and dynamic for their kids. Like somehow if they teach it in such a way, kids will get it. I think we're looking at it wrong. I think what are we doing to make sure that the soil of our family is fertile? And so that's where my prayer and my research has kind of led me is, are we connecting regularly? Are we learning and nourishing and growing? And then lastly, I want to talk about composting and how that has to do with parenting. So this whole presentation is semi based off of the wisdom we hear in this parable of the sower as kind of a way of trying to form our families, not in trying to make the faith attractive per se, but what are we doing to make the soil of our hearts fertile? We're going to take a pause real quick, especially if you're in a small group setting. If you're watching this just by yourself, maybe you just pause and think about this. But I want us to all kind of start from a place of similarity. And so what's the most important thing in your life? You can pause here and discuss among your small group, or just pause and reflect. Okay, welcome back. I think most of us are willing to say very similar things, okay? Depending on where we are in our faith lives, there's not a wrong answer at all. But I think it's important for us to know what's the most important thing in our life. And if it isn't getting our spouse and our children to heaven, then prayerfully consider asking that God helps you with that desire, because that's ultimately going to be the compass for our life. It's going to help change and reveal what is the most important step in front of us. Will this help me and my family get to heaven? Okay. So, regardless of what we said, we all find that our children's happiness and success are pretty important. I know a lot of parents, regardless of their faith lives, they make sacrifices on behalf of their children. They work extra hours so that they can take the vacations. They attend all the practices and pay all the fees to attend the practices because they want their kids to be successful. They want their kids to be happy. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a beautiful thing. I think that's a vocation that we have as parents to make sacrifices so that our kids can be happy. Me and my husband are two people. We have 6 kids. So I'm always looking for ways, where can I put my time, my energy, my prayer so that it has the biggest impact? So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. What does success look like? If we want our kids to be the most successful, what does that look like? Well, we want them to be happy. We want them to be holy. We want them to have a healthy mentality. We want them to be resilient, okay? Resilient against threats to our kids' happiness and success. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the threats right now. What threatens our kids' happiness and success? Mental illness is huge. The amount of statistics so obviously show the amount of mental illness, especially among young people, has skyrocketed since 2010. 2010 is the onset when Apple iPhones came out, when kids were able to pull out basically a computer from their back pocket and access internet at any time. That is when the growing number of mental illness, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, all of that exponentially went up with the onset of the Apple iPhone. Loneliness and isolation. The Surgeon General came out in April of 2023 saying that the threat to our society is not smoking, is not drinking, is not drugs per se. It's loneliness and isolation. The physical ramifications of loneliness and isolation are staggering. The amount of heart disease that goes up, the amount of suicidal ideation, the amount of blood pressure. I mean, all of these different things, the chances of suffering physically, emotionally, spiritually exponentially increase when you're experiencing loneliness and isolation. So we as a society, we as families really have to understand that this is a huge problem in our society, and it's kind of everywhere. Some people experience this even though they live with several people. It's not just those who are by themselves, it's an emotional loneliness and isolation. Lack of belonging and purpose. We see a lot of young people having never really struggled, really are struggling now because they don't feel like they belong at any place unless they have some kind of identity that helps them feel like they belong. And a lot of them are lacking in purpose. A lot of them feel like, if I don't show up to school, will anybody notice? Or I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. Everything feels so blah. Counterfeit connection is really big. So a lot of our young people are either spending majority of their time on video games or social media. Those are huge threats to the modern teenage landscape because they take away from real life interaction. So all of us are made to interact with one another face to face, meet up at the playground, meet up at the mall, having that face to face interaction that nourishes us, that nourishes our brains and our hearts. Well, video games and social media are social in a way, but it's in a counterfeit connection. So that same area in our brain that lights up when we're communicating with someone also lights up when we are playing video games or on social media. There's this, it almost tricks us into think we're being connected. But the big difference is there's no nourishment, that it actually makes you more hungry. So if you are lonely, you get on social media, and then after you get off of social media, you feel even more lonely. Rather than, if you feel lonely, call up a friend, meet up for coffee, and then go home, you don't feel lonely anymore. So one satisfies and one makes you hungrier. And so imagine a lot of these kids who have been raised with video games and social media, they're recognizing that they're hungry for social interaction, but they think the only way to satisfy that is being on video games or social media. So they're creating this addiction, and they're creating this need to be connected, but where they're never being satisfied. And so they're kind of on a hamster wheel, and they're not really able to find that groove. Peer orientation is something that I wanted to introduce tonight because I thought that was very telling. Okay, so there's this book, and we'll talk about it in the next slide. Okay, it's called Hold On to Your Kids. And the research that talks about this is there's two different ways that our children are oriented, okay? Either peer or parent. So peer orientation typically happens in that middle school age range when if kids don't feel connected to their parents, if they feel like their relationship is struggling or changing, a lot of times their orientation goes from the younger years when they're parent oriented, it'll shift to peer oriented. So they start to care more about what their friends think than what their parents think. They start to change their behaviors to match what is acceptable for their friends, and they're not really concerned about what parents think. So, peer orientation is extremely common in those teenage years, and it stems from a lack of belonging or a lack of connection, sincere connection with their parents. And then here's a time if you're in a small group setting, is there anything else that's threatening our kids' happiness and success? We can take some time to discuss that or we can move on. Now, if we've identified the threats to what can hold our children back from being happy and holy and healthy, there are ways that we as parents can fight back. And I think the earlier we know this, the better. Okay. So the first one I want to discuss is good parenting is simpler than we think. I think a lot of times parents throw up their hands and say, "Oh, parenting's so difficult and we're just going to have to see what happens." No, you can take charge. You can definitely do some things right now that will enhance your family's health. All kids need connection. Okay, I'm going to tell you a brief story. There was this lab that followed newborn monkeys, okay? And it had two mothers. The mother was gone, and so they created two different types of mothers. One deposited food. So it was like a metal rod. It was not soft or cushy, but it was just this metal contraption that released food. And so the monkeys that were around this mother were able to be fed and nourished physically. And then there was a different type of mother. It did not distribute food, but it was covered in this carpeting. So it was soft and snuggly. They, the people who were doing the study, wanted to understand which one the monkeys were able to connect to and prefer. And unanimously, each and every monkey preferred the soft mother that did not provide food. These monkeys were willing to be starved to death physically in order to feel connected. And that just reveals to us this hierarchy of needs that all children have. And that first need is not even physical food or nourishment, it's connection. They need to feel loved and held and touched and seen. It's a primary need for them. I think of my teenagers. Out of my six, half of them are in the teenage years. And when they start to go through puberty, we as parents often pull back. We want to respect their privacy, we want to give them their space. But a lot of us parents withhold, whether it's conscious or not, withhold physical affection. We don't really love on our kids that much when they go through puberty. And so a lot of kids hunger for that and they feel like they're not as seen and loved. So it's something that we can definitely make a mental note about, especially as our kids navigate those transitioning years of puberty. We need to make sure that we're high-fiving them. And some of them don't like touch, and that's okay, but at least we need to continue to, hey, give me a hug before we go to bed tonight, or come sit on the couch next to me, or whatever it is that feels naturally for you. But make sure that we're not forgetting that physical connection. Our kids need us. So we have been anointed by God to be the people to love our children best. We are their primary educators. We show them how to live life. We show them healthy habits. Your presence in their life is irreplaceable. No one can love them and teach them and affirm them and see them like you do. So just because they're around their aunts and uncles or they're around really good friends, I mean, that's great, but no one can replace you. So I want to discuss a little bit about parent orientation and peer orientation again. Those kids who are parent oriented, who love their parents, connect with them regularly, care about what their parents think of them, want to make their parents proud, feel like they're a part of their family, not just, servants in the family, but feel like they're seen, feel like they're valued. Those parent oriented kids are over 50% less likely to suffer from mental illness, to suffer from suicidal ideation, to suffer from anxiety, depression. So again, it kind of calls us parents to make sure that we're facilitating that parent orientation relationship with our children. So the world will tell you, oh, your kids are teenagers, they're not going to like you anymore. they normalize that. The world tells us that that's a normal thing. Just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal. I think we as parents moving forward, action items needs to make room for connection. We need to incorporate regularly, schedule it regularly, that connection time, especially that one on one connection time. So here's the book that talks about the parent orientation versus peer orientation. The book's a little dry, it's a lot of research, but I think it's incredibly important for us to understand the why behind it, but also the how. How do we encourage that parent orientation? This book has some great practical tips that, of course, we'll talk a little bit about in this presentation. But basically, it's based on years and years of research. There's thousands of cases of teenagers all across the United States. The cases followed from childhood to adulthood, and it is almost 100% of kids are parent oriented. So it starts off that way, but slowly but surely, a lot of these kids will change in those teenage years to a peer orientation. Now, friendships are important. Just because kids are parent oriented doesn't mean that they don't have friends. It just means their friends aren't the primary motivation or the primary love for those children. Something else I wanted to mention is when kids are parent oriented, there's this almost rejection of what their friends think. So if, for example, a kid is parent oriented and their friend is doing something wrong, that child will say, "Hey, stop doing that thing. You shouldn't be doing that thing," because they're willing to reject that or put that friend, what that friend thinks of them, on the line in order to do what they know their parents would want them to do. Where if a kid is peer oriented, they reject what their parents think. And so again, if in that same situation, a peer-oriented kid, their friend is doing something wrong, they fear their friend's rejection. So they're willing to reject what their parents taught them to go along with what their peer is doing. And so peer pressure really affects those who are peer oriented way more than they would someone who is parent oriented. So friendships are great, but in that parent oriented, which is what we want our children to be, they have this comfort level, this ease of being able to reject what friends say in order to embrace and to hold strong to what parents had taught them. Okay, so parent orientation, as we've spoken about, is if you're peer oriented, conversely, a lot of those kids feel anxiety because they feel like they have to change themselves almost on a daily basis to be what their friends want them to be. It's almost like they're trying to earn their friendship, and that's exhausting. Parent oriented kids are very secure in their parents' love. They know that if they don't get an A on the test, their parents will still love them. If they don't make the varsity team, their parents will still love them. Parent oriented kids become more successful adults. They have good heads on their shoulders. They're responsible, they know what's right and wrong, and they're not easily swayed. So they're able to stick to their guns and do what they know is right, which of course makes them more successful and healthy and happy and holy adults. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the recipe for creating fertile soil families. So sowing seeds in rich soil. This is kind of our aim. Okay, so this is how we grow happy, holy, and healthy kids. So the first one we need to talk about is connecting. When we connect with our children and we connect as a family, we're creating this beautiful soil for the seeds of the gospel to thrive in. Then we're going to talk about learning, or sowing the seeds. Then we're going to talk about nourishing, or watering those seeds. And then we're going to talk about the growing, right? So what happens when the seeds do bear fruit? So harvesting that fruit and what that looks like. So as you may or may not know from this presentation, I'm kind of a sucker for gardening analogies. I feel like if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. Recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, I've become a gardener. And what has come to me in the garden has been very profound. I feel like God speaks to me in the garden. I think it's a very sacred interaction. If you're not a gardener, I encourage you to begin, because there's so many similarities to how God works with us. How the gardener takes care of his garden is how Jesus takes care of his flock. Okay, so let's start with connecting. These are ways that we can foster connection within our families. So we all now are on the same page of we want our kids to be parent oriented. We want to foster connection. We want them to have a sense of belonging. We want them to feel loved. Connection is the way to do it. So here are some things we can do as parents that are really going to help foster that connection time as a family. Invest in fun, enjoyable family time. Now, this is regardless of what your budget is, okay? If you don't have a lot of extra money to spend, it's okay. You can still make some fun, enjoyable time. Every one of us has to budget, whether it's our time, whether it's our money, or maybe it's both. Invest that time and that money into your family fun time. This could mean going out to the grocery store and everyone deciding on one big bucket of ice cream, and then they take it home and everyone makes ice cream cones and we get to eat it in the living room. No way, or maybe we go on a walk while we're eating our ice cream cones, but something on a regular basis where families can feel like this is special. This goes against the family routine. We're making something different. We're making memories together. I think we as Catholics really have identified that families feast together. And so food is a beautiful way to build in that enjoyable time. Family dinners are huge. Research has supported over and over again, the more likely you have family dinners, the more likely you will have healthy, successful children, relationships, all that good stuff. And it's literally like if it's 4 or more per week, your kids are significantly much more likely to have healthy relationships, to engage less in high risk behaviors. So the sweet spot is if you're doing every night, at least 4 times, but every night, the more times you have family dinners, the more likely, statistically speaking. If you don't have any family dinners at all on a weekly basis, I highly encourage you to take your family schedule to prayer and say, Lord, we are not able to have family dinners because our schedules are so busy. Show me what I need to let go of. Because again, if the families, for example, are loving and they get along and the kids are doing sports and there's a lot of good there, but if they're not having family dinners, they're suffering. Statistically speaking, it would be abnormal for a family that does not gather for a family dinner to be happy and holy and healthy and be protected against mental illness. It's that important that we as a family make time for those family dinners. Date night between mom and dad at least once a month. Now, we're talking about kids here. We're talking about families. We're talking about, yes. So what I want to make clear today is the order of a thriving family is God first, spouse second, children third. I think that kind of ruffles some feathers, especially with our modern parenting. A lot of the newer parents, especially the moms, because they feel so inclined towards taking care of their children, which isn't a bad thing, but we need to keep those things ordered. So we love our spouse, that's wonderful. But unless we love the Lord first, unless we go to God first, our marriage will struggle. So God needs to be a part of our everyday routine. God needs to be a part of the way that we relate to our family. We need to go to God first, read scripture, say a prayer, praying the rosary, going to daily mass, some way of connecting with God on a daily basis. Your marriage will be stronger for it. If you are putting your spouse before your children, good. Okay, we need to do that because here's the thing. If you are the perfect mom, but you're ignoring your spouse because of it, that spouse or relationship is going to struggle. And I don't know about you, but anytime my parents fought growing up, I felt anxious. I felt insecure. So one of the best gifts that we can give our children is showing them what a loving, secure marriage looks like. That is our priority. We have to go to God first, spouse second, and then children third. And what I've encountered with my marriage is that when we leave our kids to go on date night, they're actually happy. They're not happy that we're leaving because they want to spend time with us, but they're happy that we're getting along. When my husband and I are getting along, our children receive security from that. They receive peace from that. They feel like there's not a threat. Okay. And when there's not a threat, that's when thriving can happen. That's when growth happens, when they're not in survival mode, but they're in thrive mode. So date nights, scheduling those at least monthly will really help your kids to feel secure and feel peaceful and feel like they're a part of a family unit. And the next are family dates. Family dates are nice. Family dates are really important, I think, to building that family identity and that time together. So we, as a family of 8, really have to make room for this in our budget. Again, not every family is going to be able to take out their entire family to dinner, but there's something that's really important when we do. Okay, so I grew up in a family of 9 kids. If you're curious to learn more about that, I actually have a podcast with my 4 sisters, and we discuss what it was like growing up in a family of 9 kids, 11 people, and how close we were. But anyway, that's a side note. I can link that in the comments of this YouTube video if you're curious and want to learn more about that. But I remember we didn't go out to eat much because there were so many of us. So what we ended up doing was my parents would do things like family movie night, and they would cut up apples and oranges and arrange it on a plate. And then we would spread a blanket out and everyone would have their own bowl of popcorn. And we got to eat outside the kitchen, which was kind of a big deal because it went against this family rule, right? But we ate those apples and oranges like they were the most delectable thing ever because it was for us. Okay. So there's ways of creating family dates that don't involve going out to eat. But Matt, my husband, he likes to spend his money on taking them out to eat. And so it shows our children that they're worth spending our money on. So he goes to work so he can treat us, so he can take us out to dinner and make us feel nice. Just like we wives personally, I mean, I love when my husband takes me out for a date. I feel like I'm loved and cherished and taken care of. Why not extend that towards our children? Doesn't have to be an entire meal. Maybe you go out to a Mexican restaurant, eat chips and salsa, and everyone orders a drink and we all split a dessert or something. There's ways of making it affordable, but it's worth pursuing because our kids need to receive that same time and attention when we go out to eat. So I encourage you to make family dates. Monthly would be ideal, but at least twice a year. Another thing that you can do for a family date is a family adventure. I cannot believe how much our kids like to go on family walks. Okay. They don't grow out of it. There's something really universally beautiful about taking a walk, especially a stroll through nature. If you wanted to, you could always add a treat that they could eat along the walk. But if not, it's just holding hands. You and spouse hold hands. The kids watch and follow. Some of the kids ride their scooters. Some of us just all walk. But either way, we're spending time together. We're uniting together. We're exercising together. We're enjoying nature together. That's a beautiful way to spend a family date. So I encourage you to try and do that monthly. Now, parent-child dates. Okay, so again, I have 6 children and there's one of me. Occasionally, my husband will take them on dates too, especially daddy-daughter dates. He really likes to treat the girls well. She gets all dressed up. And my husband's taken my daughter Grace to the symphony to watch like a Harry Potter symphony. Sometimes we'll do an orchestra there. So he'll take her out to a nice Italian meal and then take her to the symphony. That happens usually like once a year. So, just identifying what your kids care about. It could be their favorite band. It could be a sports event. One time, my husband couldn't come with me to a pro-life gala that we went to. And so I took my son, Ben, because he's kind of a metro guy. Like he likes to be a man about town and he likes to kind of be wined and dined. And so we got to sit at this gala and he got to see this really big thing. So, just things like that, just basically inviting them, that art of invitation. So it's one parent inviting one of your children out for something. It means a lot. They feel seen, they feel chosen. During that time, the conversations are incredible. What the kids tell you, what they feel safe telling you is a beautiful thing. Okay, so the last one is called tuck-in time. Now, I saved the best for last because this is something regular. This is the time where we check in with them on a regular basis. Okay. So tuck in time. Tuck in time, I learned from a Mormon blogger. She has 8 kids as well. And I think one of the things I was struggling with is, I'm only one person. How can I check in on all my kids on a semi-regular basis? So when she taught about tuck in time, it just clicked. Each child gets tuck-in time, which is a 15 to 20-minute block per week. Okay. So at bedtime, so for example, my 7-year-olds, they go to bed pretty early at 7:30 on the night that they have tuck-in time. So we say Monday through Friday are the ways, Monday through Thursday really are the days that we do tuck-in time. And we have 6 kids, so we have to kind of double stack. But on Monday nights, I have my twins and they usually go to bed at 7:30. And so at 7:30, they get to stay up 15 minutes past their bedtime. They get to choose one parent, mom or dad, usually it's mom. They get to choose one snack. So you can have like a snack menu, if you don't want them having a handful of M&Ms right before bed, I don't blame you. But one of the things that we do that seems to be really popular is popcorn and sometimes hot chocolate. Occasionally they'll choose something else, but usually that's kind of what they choose. So they'll choose their snack, then they'll choose their parent, and then they get to choose one activity. Okay. So for example, on Monday night, Pax, my youngest, who's 7, gets to stay up from 7:30 to 7:45, and he chooses the snack. Usually it's hot cocoa. Then we go into my bed. I actually let him bring cocoa in my bed. You don't have to, but wherever you want to have tuck-in time, make sure it's away from the rest of the family because you want to build that one-on-one time. And it's so essential, especially for those of us who have quality time as our language of love. There's something so priceless about being seen and heard without an interruption. So we'll typically watch YouTube videos because he loves to watch Lego sets being built. He's a big Lego fan. Sometimes we'll just talk. Sometimes we'll just snuggle. Sometimes we'll go for a walk. I remember, I think it was last summer, the nights, by the time the kids go to bed, the sun's just setting. And so we took a sunset walk. And by the time we got back, it was dark and we got to see the moon and it was really cool. And we were drinking our cocos as we were walking and we found some frogs hopping around. And so after we finished our cocoa, we tried to scoop up the frogs to try to catch them and we took pictures. It is to this day still talked about as one of their favorite tuck-in times. So it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be incredible. It's just regular. And it creates these memories and it creates this sense of belonging and it creates this sense of purpose and that they are seen and loved and they belong here. So tuck-in time happens on a weekly basis. You assign, each child gets a night. And if you have more than 4 or 5 kids, then you can double up. We save Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for me and Matt. That's when we have our date nights. That's when we stay up, when the kids go to bed. That's our time. So you structure it however you want. Maybe your nights are really busy. Maybe you have tuck-in time in the morning and you call it morning time or whatever it is. But it's totally up to you and your family. But I highly recommend scheduling a 15-minute chunk, 15 to 20-minute chunk per child on a weekly basis. This is where you really get to pour into their language of love. If you haven't taken a quiz with your child yet, language of love quiz, figure out what their language of love is. That can be a whole different presentation on loving your kids well, because we often give and receive love in different languages. And so your son could come up and give you hugs all the time. But if your love language is not physical touch, all of his hugs aren't necessarily loving. They can be annoying, right? And it doesn't mean that you're not a good mom. It just means that's not your primary language of love. So during the first tuck-in time, if you haven't already, use that time to help them through a love language quiz and discover what their love language is. During that tuck-in time is a great way to intentionally love them in their own language. That is honestly how I'm able to keep tabs on all my kids and making sure they feel loved is through tuck-in time. So I highly recommend it. There's a QR code here. You're welcome to stop and pause and follow this QR code because it goes to my website where I have created a PDF that helps you establish tuck-in time. And so you can print off one per child, you can laminate it, you can fill it out each week. There's one that has suggestions and there's one that's completely blank. Okay, here's a time to just stop, especially if you're in a small group, and discuss the following question. Can you remember a time when your mom or dad connected with you and it made an impact? Okay, so hopefully you all had a chance to discuss. Anytime I give this presentation live, I love this question because several people can just think back to a time with their dad, for example. Maybe their dad didn't get along with them really well, but one time my dad asked me to go run errands with him. And I still remember it this day because I felt like I was seen. I felt like I was chosen. We had a good conversation. He even bought me a candy bar at the end or whatever it was. But like it's so important for us to invite our children and to carve out our precious time to be with them. And it doesn't have to be spectacular. They just have to feel seen. They have to feel like it was a time that they um, got to spend time with their parent one-on-one. It is important. And hopefully you remember those times in your own life. Okay, so we've kind of established connection, all the different ways to connect to build that fertile soil. So the next step any gardener would know is once the soil is prepared, then we start to sow the seeds. Okay. Now, in the family analogy, we sow the seeds through teaching them to accept love by example. Now, someone has said once, faith is caught, not taught. And I think that's kind of the theme of this slide is that we have a chance to sow seeds in our family and to really show our kids how to be happy, holy, and healthy. But in order to do that, we must do that first. So here are some ways to show them, sow the seeds through your own example. So the first one here is teaching them to pray, letting them watch you pray. Your example matters. This is going to be a difficult question for all of us. Do your kids see you pray on a regular basis? That's a tough question. And I want you to, if necessary, pause and think about that. Do your kids see you pray on a regular basis? Now, some of you might pray every day, but might hide it. The scripture of go into your room and close the door and pray. And I get why that's scripture, but I think for our children's sake, they need to see us pray, or else they're never going to know that you prayed. So we're not bragging to our kids. We're literally teaching them, and we're teaching them by example. It's the most effective way of teaching your kids how to pray. So maybe it's you get up 15 minutes early. So when the kids get out of their bedrooms in the morning time, you're sitting there with your cup of coffee and your Bible open. If they see that happen every single day, that's going to show them, not just teach them, it's going to show them it's worth doing when they grow up. Think about, do you and or your spouse pray on a regular basis, and do your kids see that? So showing them how you and your spouse love one another. This one's big too. So kids who come from a loving family of the mom and dad who are still together, who love each other well, they are significantly more likely to have a relationship like that themselves. I think a lot of times we think teaching means, okay, class, gather around, I'm going to tell you all the things. That is not an effective way of teaching the faith and teaching virtue. Okay, virtue is taught in the arena. Virtue is taught by doing. So if you want your kids to have a loving, healthy relationship, you have to show them what that looks like. And so that might mean investing time in your marriage, reading books that help you to be a better wife or a better husband, showing them that date night is important, that you have to carve out time to be with one another, getting up early to make your spouse breakfast before they have to leave for work, making them coffee, showing them these little selfless acts. That is what our kids see. So in order to show them how to have healthy relationships, we need to know how to do those things. Date night, again, is a must. This is important. We have to show them this is important. And then last, I want us to kind of reflect a little bit on the first letter of John in Scripture, chapter 4, verse 19. We love because he first loved us. I think sometimes when we think of selfless love, there's 4 different types of love. The Greeks have 4 different words for love. There's storge, philia, eros, and agape. Okay, so a lot of us have heard the word agape, but basically that means the highest form of love. It's a selfless form of love. And one of the best examples of that is Christ on the cross. Now, a lot of times we think love is a feeling, and that's not necessarily love. Love is a choice. And love often, the highest form of love, often demands a sacrifice, some kind of self-sacrificing love. So a lot of us feel like in our families, especially with our kids after we've had a bad day, when our kids want us to read a story. Have you guys ever had that when your kids want you to read and at night you're just so done? You're just like, I am done. Get to bed. That's all the energy I have for you today. Okay, raise your hand. We've all been there. No shame. But those are the times. Those are the times where agape really kicks in. And I think sometimes we as parents think we just need to be better. I just need to be better. I need to just sacrifice better. I need to just, love like God. And it's me, me, me. And we think the effort has to come from us. And I want us to remember that in John's letter, he tells us we agape because he first agape'd us. Okay. So ask yourself, do you let Jesus love you? Do you let his sacrifice on the cross wash over you? Do you embrace that as a gift, or do you reject it because you don't feel good enough? I think a lot of us parents struggle with accepting the love of God because we don't feel worthy of it. Well, no wonder you can't love your children selflessly on a regular basis, because you're not letting him love you. We agape because he first loved us. So spend some time over the next week or so and really embrace that love, for nothing better than just to love your children better. Let him love you, and that will in turn make loving them easier. Okay, the next step, after we've prepared the soil, after we've sowed the seeds, now it's time to nourish the growth. Okay, so this is like kind of looking at the environment in which growing is taking place. And in the analogy of our family, this is what's the environment that we're providing our children for growth? How are we watering them? How are we exposing them to sunshine so that those seeds can germinate and really grow and take root? There's a couple analogies here. So make sure that the child's environment gives what is needed for growth. I would say access to the sacraments is huge, because spiritually speaking, growth needs grace. We need exposure to Christ himself. So have your children baptized. If they haven't been baptized, I encourage you right now to stop what you're doing and make an appointment with your local Catholic church to get them baptized. It is so crucially important. This water that we talk about in nourishing plant growth, the water of baptism is necessary for them to have access to this grace. So if they're not baptized, get them baptized. If they're in second grade and they're ready for sacrament preparation, prepare them for the sacraments, enroll them, teach them at home, whatever it takes. First communion, reconciliation, those are beautiful, really wells of grace that they can come to over and over and over again. And you show them it's important by you doing them. So how often are you receiving the grace of the sacrament of confession? How often are you receiving the grace of daily communion? Not just Sundays. Sundays are great. If you're not going every Sunday, make sure that's a priority, okay? Because again, your kids need to know that this is important and that we have to honor the Sabbath every single week, regardless of what the plans are. If you can't make your regular 8:30 Mass, find a different Mass that works for your time, but you have to find a Mass and you have to show your kids that this is worth doing. But then also that Sabbath protects and gives us grace for the next continued week. There's wisdom in honoring the Sabbath and having one day where you don't do anything. We have to teach the world that not being productive for one day is actually going to help you be productive for the rest of the days. If you try and be productive every single day, you're going to run out of steam. And how many of us have run out of steam? How many of us are struggling with overwhelm? It is so common because we don't honor the Sabbath. Okay, consistent rules and expectations. Consistency has been difficult for me, just between you and me. It's difficult for me to be a consistent parent, but I've learned that when we are consistent with the rules, it actually has a calming effect on our children because they know no matter what I do, this is going to be the rule. There's something very secure about that, and there's something very peaceful about that. So I just want to encourage you to establish consistent rules and expectations. That doesn't mean you don't ever change them. It just means if you have discerned with your husband that, the kids are old enough now to eat out of the kitchen because they all clean up after themselves. Okay, you can change that rule as a family, but be consistent about enforcing it. Okay. Protection from what's harmful. I think that's really big for our kids, especially in this digital age. More and more kids have access to more and more screens at an earlier and earlier age. A lot of kids are they have their own iPads when they're 2 years old, and they don't have any way of limiting what they see or what they come in contact with. So we really encourage there to be apps or software that really helps them to not see anything harmful. You need to be in the same room when they're on their screens. I mean, really at any age, not allowing cell phones or devices in bedrooms with closed doors at any age. Conversations, for example, if they're in the bedroom, they have to keep the door open. Whatever it is that you feel as a family is a way of trying to protect them from potential harm, do it. And let them know, oh, my mom, that's so lame. Why don't you trust me? It has nothing to do with trust. It has everything to do with establishing healthy behaviors. So if they disagree with the rule, that's okay. I'm sorry. Thank you for telling me that you disagree. And if you've proven that this and this and this happens, maybe we'll talk then when you get to be this age or whatever it is. But stay consistent with the rules and expectations, especially when they're protecting your kids from potential harm. Okay, and lastly, plants need wind to be strong. Okay. As I said, I'm a relatively new gardener, and I remember the first year I was so excited to indoor sow seeds in little soil blocks, so that I can transfer them outside. And so I had tomatoes and I had peppers and I had all these different herbs that were starting to take root, and they were getting leggy. Okay, so that means they were getting really long and thin. Now, what I didn't know at the time, which I know now, is that in order to create strong seedlings, like little miniature plants, right? When seeds take root and start growing, in order for them to be strong, you need to have a windy environment. And it's like, duh, of course, because outside is windy. But the wind damages them in such a way that they have to grow back stronger. Okay. So if I were to just take these leggy seedlings and then bring them outside, all of them died because they weren't strong enough to withstand the wind. And so it got me to think about something called anti-fragile. There's a book called Anti-Fragile, but also Jonathan Haidt has written The Anxious Generation, which is incredible. He's also written a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And so he actually talks about this term, a relatively new term called anti-fragile. So briefly, I'm going to explain to you the durability of something. So the first level of durability is fragile. So it's like a teacup. If you drop a teacup, it's going to shatter. and a bunch of pieces, and you're not going to be able to put it back together. That is called fragile. Okay. Then there's something called durable. So if you think of like a Tupperware cup and you drop that, it's not going to break, and you can drop it over and over and over again. It's not going to break, but it's also not going to get stronger because you've dropped it. So that's durable. Now, the most durable is something called anti-fragile. This is when, for example, if you were to have an anti-fragile cup, it would be one that gets stronger every time you drop it. Okay. So in our world, our immune system would be an example of being anti-fragile. So your immune system, the more germs and dirt you're exposed to, the stronger that your immune system will be. Okay. Every time you get that cold, every time you get that flu, it actually helps your immune system get stronger because it's powered down for a little bit, but it comes back stronger. So we as humans are anti-fragile. We need to have the wind of the world. We need to have things that push us around. We need to have things that essentially hurt us or cause us suffering, because that is how we become stronger. And so this whole book has called The Anxious Generation, has a lot to do with permitting parents to once again let our children struggle. Okay, so a part of the environment when we're protecting our kids' growth is to not swoop in and solve their problems for them, or to not swoop in and take away any of their suffering. I'll give you a really good example. My 7-year-old Pax, he's so sweet, and he's really trying to work on that fine motor skill. Tying his shoes is difficult. And there are times when mommy's in a hurry and we need to hurry up. And so I'm like, you need to tie your shoes. And he's like, could you just do it for me? And there's such a temptation in me to just swoop in and do it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't tie your shoes. You need to do that yourself. And sometimes he'll moan, and sometimes I don't want to, but we need to let our kids struggle through it, because that's how their self-esteem is really how it grows. If they're anti-fragile, we need them to experience wind. So then when we transplant them into the real world, the wind that they experience in their childhood will help them to be strong enough to withstand the wind that they have in adulthood. Wind being the struggles and the negative things that come their way. So those are some ways that we can provide, the water and the sun and the wind, the environment for the best growth within our families. The last step, the step that gardeners live for, is the growth, right? The harvest. So the reason why we plant these plants is so that they can bear fruit. So watching our kids continue the process of connect, learn, nourish, grow. If we teach them by example and we incorporate that into our families, they're going to start taking those elements and do them in their own families. And so maybe 20, 30 years from now, we might have grandkids and we might see our kids establish this connection, learn, nourish, growth model that we've taught them in our own families. Show them how to give thanks and praise for all the good things. I think no matter what stage you're in, whether you're readying the soil, whether you're sowing seeds, whether you're nourishing the growth, whether you're harvesting, it's so important to teach them to give thanks and praise to God in every aspect of our lives, in every stage of our lives, because we need to be a Eucharistic people. And the root word for Eucharist is thanksgiving. We need to be able to teach them how to be thankful, and no matter what you do. So for example, when we have these family dinners, we have something called rose, thorn, and bud. So rose is a good thing that happened to you today. Thorn is a bad thing that happened to you today. And bud is something that you're looking forward to. It teaches them on a daily basis, what are you thankful for? What went well today? It teaches them how to look. Okay. Then the thorn teaches them that if you have a bad day, let's talk about it. How can we help you carry this load? How can we help you give this to God, both the good and the bad? And then lastly, to look forward in hope with that bud. What's coming up? So if we're having a bad day right now, if we feel stuck right now in all the crap that's happening, let's just make a path of, well, there's something good in the future that I can look forward to. And that hope really helps sustain us, and it helps to direct our hearts. Put the fruit to good use. Teach your kids how to serve God. Okay, so in this harvesting, if you're starting to see that your kids are compassionate, if you're starting to see that your kids like to advocate, so maybe you've got a strong boy and maybe you see he likes to protect the young. He likes to protect the weak people, the people that really need protection, maybe the people that are getting bullied. Maybe you start to see that in your son. And then so you show your son, hey, I've seen this in you. I think that's really beautiful. Do you know that God is trying to use that gift in you to love others? Maybe you join martial arts, and maybe you help the younger, weaker kids to feel good about themselves. Give them ways to identify what they're good at, what's bearing fruit in their life, and then B, helping them direct that towards service of the church. Find a place for them to use that. Find a place that God can use them to love other people. It's going to give them that purpose. It's going to make them feel seen. It's going to make them feel valued. It's going to make them have the sense of, this is who I am. This is how God is using me. And this is what's going to direct my life going forward. It's a priceless gift we can give to our children. Okay. Now, before we end this presentation, I have to tell you a little bit about something called compost parenting. Okay. So first of all, just to kind of summarize, we must regularly check in our soil. So if you're any kind of gardener, every year, every spring before the growing season happens, you got to check, is your soil still healthy? Okay, so those regular check-ins are, do you feel connected, kids? Do you feel like you're part of the family still? You haven't talked much lately. What's going on with you? Tuck-in time is a great way for that to happen. Okay, just briefly, my son Joseph at school was kind of disengaging. I had a couple of teachers say, Joseph's not really turning in his work and things like that. So during our tuck-in time, I was going, what's going on with you? What's happening? And he was saying that how he was bored, he was feeling overwhelmed. So what we did for his tuck-in time is we went to his school and we cleaned out his locker and I helped him organize everything. And I said, okay, tomorrow we're going to have a better day. We're going to feel less overwhelmed. You're going to have all your stuff wherever you need it. So it's just a way of us kind of jumping into what they're struggling with and then showing them how to find a way out of it. Again, tuck-in time is that regular weekly time that we can check in. It doesn't have to be all day, every day. Even weekly is fine. Okay, so compost parenting. One of the things that I never knew, I didn't really know what compost was until I became a gardener. Compost is the most valuable soil, and basically it's valuable failure. Okay, so compost is comprised of rejection. So you take, if you're making strawberries and you're cutting off the tops, you take the tops of the strawberries and you put them in the compost. When you're potato peels, so you're taking potato peels and you're peeling them off, or carrots and you're peeling them off, all the peels will go in the compost pile. So compost is basically what we don't need anymore, what we're rejecting. Okay. So then it sits together in this pile and you have a mix of the vegetables and the refuse. And then you mix it with things like cardboard or paper, and they actually help to break one another down. And it forms this rich soil. It forms this beautiful soil, and it's got nutrients, and it's loose enough for the roots to grow down big and all that stuff. So we've established that compost is so valuable to a gardener. Similarly, we as parents have these rejection moments in parenting, okay? So there's something called rupture and repair. So this is when you're having a conversation with your kid, they do something stupid because they always will, and then we blow up on them. We yell, we tell them, oh, I can't believe you did this or whatever, and we don't react the way you ought to react, quote unquote. So we rupture. The kid feels maybe rejected. They don't feel like you're loving them. They feel scared that you're yelling at them, but then you repair. Okay. So a good parent isn't one that doesn't yell. A good parent is one that may yell, but then comes back and says, I'm sorry. I overreacted, or maybe I was a little emotional. I'm still upset with you, but I shouldn't have yelled at you, and I apologize. Do you forgive me? And that kid forgives you. Okay. So you have lived out something called rupture and repair. So what scientists are saying now is that when we rupture and repair, we're creating stronger and more emotionally mature children than if we never would have yelled at all. I used to think parenting, in order to be a good parent, I didn't yell, and that I was always calm and that I was always patient. Like, we always have this comparison in our head that we're like comparing ourselves to like this perfect parent that doesn't exist. Well, science is now on our side that says it's not about not yelling. It's not about not losing our cool or messing up. In fact, we create more healthy children. We create better emotional tools for these kids when we show them that it's okay. It's okay to blow up as long as you seek that repair afterwards. So if we were going to take this composting analogy and apply it towards these failures that we've had during our parenting, where we blow up on our kids or where we yell at them, or God forbid, if we call them a name, or if we forget to pick them up from soccer practice, or whatever the failings that we've had as parents, we're showing them that I'm not perfect. but I'm willing to apologize and to admit when I'm wrong. And when we do that, we show our children what to do when they mess up, because they will mess up. So imagine if you're one of those parents who is quote unquote perfect, right? And who doesn't mess up. Well, our kids might not feel permission. So what if they mess up? Maybe they feel ashamed and bring it to their parent because they think it's normal for no one to ever mess up. So we're modeling for them that, you know what? We're imperfect. We don't do things right all the time. But when we do mess up, we seek forgiveness. We admit what we did was wrong, and we ask humbly for that person who we hurt to forgive us. And it actually creates this beautiful soil that when we do sow seeds of love, they're able to embrace it and they're able to continue it on in their future relationships. So please do not beat yourself up when we mess up. Just show your children how to repair that. Live out that composting parenting. Okay, so here are our final thoughts, kind of summarizing the whole process of what we talked about today. The first step in creating faithful families that will be faithful forever is to create that soil, that fertile soil, and we do that through connection. Tuck-in times, dates, seeing and choosing our children on a regular basis, checking in with them. The next step is, once we've prepared the soil, we sow the seeds, and we do that through our example. So we sow the seeds of the gospel in our families through developing our own prayer life, letting our kids kind of see what we do to be happy, holy, and healthy, and they'll take root in that. Making sure that you're protecting your marriage and showing them how to have loving relationships by loving your spouse well. And then again, in order for us to agape our children well, to love them selflessly, we must first embrace the love that Jesus has for us. So take that tendency of not feeling worthy of love and put it aside, because it's not helpful for you in your relationship with Jesus, and it's not helpful for you in trying to ask the Lord to love your children through you. After we've sown the seeds, we're going to protect the environment in which those seeds grow. We're going to adjust our environment to our kids to where they grow well. We're going to keep exposing them to the grace of the sacraments. We're going to shield them from any type of pests or things that can harm them. And we're going to allow them to experience some wind, some suffering, in order to make those roots strong, so that when they are adults, they won't crumble under the pressure of the wind that comes their way. And then lastly, we're going to see the growth that takes place. We're going to see the fruit that comes from this growing process. We're going to harvest that fruit. We're going to let it continue. And then we're also going to allow that fruit to be put to work. Okay. We're going to show our kids, this is what you're good at. And this is how you can use what you're good at to build the body of Christ. Amend the soil if necessary. If we start to see that the growing isn't really taking place, maybe the soil isn't as healthy as we thought it was. That's why we need to have those regular tuck-in times, those weekly times where we establish, hey, kid, how you doing? Do you feel connected? Do you feel like you're loved? Why or why not? What do we need to change to make sure that the soil is healthy, or that the environment is helping our children grow, or that the seeds that we're planting are sincere and they're good seeds? And then lastly, compost is priceless. Do not let the failures of family life stop you from thinking that your family can thrive. Just show them, model for them how to apologize and move on, and just understand that this is a way that we can continually build strong families. Here is my family ministry website that has a whole bunch of different ways that we can help families grow. So that tuck-in time form is available there, but also ways just to pray the rosary, ways to help our own personal relationships with Christ. So again, we can model for our children how to do the same. You are welcome to contact me through this website or through my email if you have any questions. Thank you so much for watching today, and I pray that this presentation was helpful, and I'll be praying for you and your families that you continue to grow and thrive. God bless.